The restaurant was alive with chatter and laughter, but for Mia, the night was about to take a turn she would never forget. He walked in like he owned the world. Sharp suit, expensive watch, and an attitude that screamed money. Everyone knew his name, David Langford, a self-made millionaire who thought he was above everyone else. When Mia, the black waitress, greeted him with a smile, he didn't just ignore her. He humiliated her. Laughter. Silence. What she did next. It left the entire restaurant speechless. Before we continue the story, let us know, where are you watching from? Mia Thompson had worked at Golden Ivy, an upscale restaurant, for 3 years. It wasn't just a job. It was her way of saving up for college. She wasn't rich. She didn't have powerful connections. But she worked hard, treated people with kindness, and believed in respect, something David Langford clearly lacked. David wasn't just any customer. He was a big deal in the business world, known for his wealth, arrogance, and the way he looked down on people. He owned real estate, luxury hotels, and a reputation for treating employees like they were beneath him. And that night, he made sure Mia knew exactly how small she was in his eyes. Golden Ivy was the kind of place where the rich dined, where the tables were polished like mirrors, and the chandeliers sparkled. The waiters moved swiftly, their hands steady, their words practiced, but no one wanted to serve David Langford. Mia didn't get a choice. When she walked up to his table with a polite smile, she expected the usual entitled attitude, but she wasn't prepared for what he did next, because instead of treating her like a person, he humiliated her in front of everyone. Mia took a deep breath and approached David's table, balancing the tray carefully in her hands. She had served difficult customers before, but there was something about the way David Langford carried himself, as if everyone else in the restaurant was invisible, that made her uneasy. She placed a glass of water in front of him. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Golden Ivy. Can I start you off with something to drink?" David didn't even look at her. Instead, he slowly turned to his business partner, a man in an equally expensive suit, and smirked. "You see, this is what I was talking about," he said loudly. "They just hire anyone these days. No standards anymore." Mia felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, would you like to hear our specials?" David finally glanced up at her, his expression filled with amusement. "No, I'd like someone else to serve me. Someone more suited for a place like this." Laughter. Low at first, but then his business partner chuckled. A few other diners at nearby tables smirked, pretending not to listen. Mia felt the heat rise in her face. "I'm your server tonight, sir." David leaned back, looking her up and down. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them. Dismissive, cold. "I doubt that," he said, waving his hand. "Get me someone else." Mia's fingers gripped the tray tighter. She could feel every pair of eyes in the restaurant on her. A part of her wanted to walk away. Another part wanted to throw the water in his face. But she did neither. She forced a smile, even though her chest burned with anger. "I'll give you a moment to decide." She turned and walked away, keeping her head high, even when she heard them laughing behind her. Mia stormed into the back, her hands shaking as she set the tray down. "I'm not serving him," she said firmly to her manager. Her manager, a middle-aged man named Eric, looked uncomfortable. Mia just let it go. "Let it go," she repeated, eyes wide. "He just humiliated me in front of the entire restaurant." Eric sighed. "I know, but he's a VIP customer. He spends thousands here. We can't afford to lose him." Mia stared at him. "So that means he can treat people however he wants." Eric looked away. "I didn't say that." "But you're thinking it," Mia said bitterly. She couldn't believe it. No one was going to stand up for her. Her co-workers avoided her eyes. They had seen what happened. They had heard every word. But no one wanted to get involved. David Langford was powerful, and no one wanted to risk upsetting a powerful man. Mia exhaled slowly. Fine. If no one else was going to do anything about it, she would handle it herself. Mia walked back to David's table, this time with confidence. "Sir," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Are you ready to order?" David raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you're still here? Thought I made myself clear." Mia didn't flinch. "I'm just doing my job." David sighed dramatically. "Fine. I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare, and make sure it's not overcooked. I don't trust people like you to get things right." Mia nodded. "Of course, sir. And for your side?" David smirked. "Surprise me. Actually, you know what? Number, I don't like surprises. People like you don't usually get them right." His business partner laughed loudly. The people at the nearby tables glanced over, some with pity, some with amusement. Mia remained calm, but inside she was boiling. "Understood," she said. She turned and walked away, but this time she had a plan. Mia had spent years working at Golden Ivy. She knew how to read people, and she knew exactly how to handle men like David Langford. She went to the kitchen and made sure everything about his order was perfect. Every detail. Because arrogant men like him expected failure, and Mia wasn't about to give him what he wanted. When the food was ready, she returned to his table, carefully setting down his plate. David barely glanced at it before making a show of sighing. This better not be cold. He picked up his knife and fork and cut into the steak. And that's when his expression changed. Mia smiled. "Got him. Because the steak? It was cooked perfectly." David paused, clearly caught off guard. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain, but instead of admitting it, he forced a smirk. "Well," he said, leaning back, "I suppose even the worst restaurants get lucky sometimes." Mia kept her face neutral, but inside she knew exactly what had just happened. David wanted to humiliate her again. He wanted her to fail so he could continue feeling superior. But she hadn't failed. She had beaten him at his own game. And this was just the beginning. David took another bite of his steak, still chewing slower than before. The arrogance on his face had shifted, just slightly. Mia noticed it. He had been expecting a mistake, waiting for her to fail, but everything had been perfect. Mia stood there, watching him. "Is everything to your liking, sir?" David took a sip of his wine, setting the glass down with an unnecessary smirk. "It's acceptable." The business partner chuckled. "See, David? Even a broken clock is right twice a day." David laughed, but it was forced. Mia saw right through it. He had come into this restaurant expecting to crush someone beneath his feet. Instead, he had been served with the same level of class and professionalism he had never shown anyone, and he hated it. Mia smiled politely. "I'm glad you think so, sir." David leaned forward, wiping his mouth with his napkin. "Tell me something. How long have you worked here?" Mia knew where this was going, but she answered anyway. 3 years, David nodded. 3 years, huh? And you're still a waitress? Silence. The business partner raised an eyebrow. Some nearby diners glanced over. Mia kept her posture relaxed, but inside she could feel the insult hanging in the air. David wasn't just asking. He was making a point. "You must not be very ambitious," he continued, swirling the wine in his glass. "Most people would have moved on to something better by now, unless, of course, this is the best you can do." The smirk on his face was unbearable. Mia's jaw tightened for a split second, but just as quickly, she relaxed again. She wasn't going to let him decide how this ended. She tilted her head slightly, looking at him with something David had never been faced with before. "Pity, sir," she said softly. "Have you ever considered that success isn't just measured by money?" David blinked. The smirk faded just a little. She continued, "Maybe success is about treating people with kindness. Maybe it's about making someone's day better instead of tearing them down. Maybe real success is knowing that when you leave a room, people are actually happy you were there." Silence. David scoffed. "That's something poor people say." Mia smiled. "That's something insecure people say." The entire restaurant went still. David's business partner nearly choked on his drink. The guests at the nearby tables looked up. Some of them tried to hide their smirks. David's face turned red. He opened his mouth, but for the first time all night he had no response. Mia stayed calm. "Enjoy your meal, sir." And with that, she turned and walked away. But it wasn't over yet. David sat there, gripping his knife and fork so hard his knuckles turned white. He wasn't used to people talking back, especially not people like her. He glanced around, realizing that everyone was still watching him. And that's when the worst thing happened. People started whispering. A woman at the next table shook her head. A young couple chuckled quietly. The businessman next to him muttered, "She got you good, Langford." David's face burned. This was supposed to be his moment. He had come here to be admired, respected, feared. Instead, he was the joke. His business partner cleared his throat. Well, that was awkward. David shoved his plate aside, no longer interested in his meal. "Let's go." But just as he reached for his wallet, another voice cut through the room. "Actually, sir, there's something else you should know." David looked up, eyes narrowing. Mia had returned. She held a small receipt in her hands. "I wanted to personally bring you this," she said, setting it in front of him. David barely glanced at it. Yeah, I'll sign it." But Mia didn't move. "Oh, no need, sir. Your bill has already been paid." David frowned. "What?" Mia smiled, but this time, it wasn't the polite smile of a waitress. It was something else. "Your meal was covered by Mr. Reynolds, the owner of Golden Ivy." David's face dropped. "Excuse me?" Mia nodded. "Yes, sir. Mr. Reynolds left a note for you as well." She handed him a small folded card. David opened it, his eyes scanning the words. The color in his face drained. His business partner leaned over, reading it too. Then he let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered. "That's rough." David's hands shook slightly as he reread the note. "I heard about how you treated my staff tonight. If this is how you conduct yourself in business, I have no interest in working with you. Dinner is on me, because I'd rather you never spend another dollar in my restaurant again." David clenched his jaw so tight it hurt. He had come here to impress William Reynolds. The restaurant owner was a well-respected businessman, one of the few people in the industry that even David looked up to. And now, that relationship was gone. Mia stood there, watching him realize everything. David had humiliated himself, not because Mia had fought back, but because his own arrogance had destroyed him. The entire restaurant watched as he stood up, his movements stiff with anger. He threw a few bills on the table, far more than necessary, then stormed out, his business partner following behind. The second the doors closed behind them, the entire restaurant burst into applause. Mia turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her heart pounding. She hadn't just won. She had ended David Langford. And he knew it. David stormed out of the restaurant, his footsteps heavy with frustration. The humiliation burned in his chest. He had always been the most powerful man in the room. But not tonight. His business partner struggled to keep up. "That was rough," he muttered. "Reynolds has a lot of influence. This could hurt you." David didn't respond. His mind was racing. The entire restaurant had laughed at him. Mia had outplayed him. And worst of all, Reynolds, one of the most respected businessmen in the city, had just cut ties with him. He couldn't let this stand. David pulled out his phone and dialed a number. The person on the other end picked up almost immediately. "Find out everything you can about that waitress," he snapped. "Mia Thompson. I want details. Where she lives, where she's from, who she knows, everything." There was a brief pause before the voice responded. "Understood." David hung up, his jaw tightening. If she thought this was over, she was wrong. The next morning, David's phone rang. It was his investigator. "You're not going to believe this," the man said. "That waitress, Mia Thompson, she's not just some ordinary server." David frowned. "What do you mean?" The investigator sighed. "You wanted dirt on her, but I found something else. Turns out she's the daughter of Elijah Thompson." David's stomach dropped. That name, that very specific name. "Wait," he said, sitting up. "Elijah Thompson? As in Thompson and Associates?" "The very same," the investigator confirmed. "One of the most respected law firms in the state. And guess what? Her father isn't just some small-time lawyer. He's the man who defended Reynolds in court years ago. That's why Reynolds respects her. That's why he took her side." David's grip tightened on his phone. This couldn't be happening. Mia wasn't just a waitress. She was the daughter of a man who had enough power to destroy his entire business. And the worst part, she had never even mentioned it. She had never used her father's name. She had fought back on her own, without needing her connections. David's arrogance had made him blind. He had walked into the restaurant thinking he was above everyone, but he had unknowingly picked a fight with the one person who had the ability to bring him to his knees, and he had done it all to himself. Meanwhile, Mia sat on her balcony, sipping her coffee. She hadn't heard from David since he left the restaurant, but she knew men like him. They didn't like losing. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. "Proud of you. Reynolds told me everything." Mia smiled. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because it was right. People like David Langford built their power on fear and control. But Mia had learned something that he never had. Real power comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away. David thought money made him untouchable, but Mia had proven him wrong, and now he would never forget it. David Langford sat in his office, staring at the city skyline through the large glass windows. But for the first time in his career, he didn't feel powerful. His meeting requests were going unanswered. Calls weren't being returned. And worst of all, his investors were asking questions. William Reynolds had influence. A lot of it. And now that David had publicly disrespected the daughter of Elijah Thompson, one of the most respected legal minds in the industry, he had put himself in the worst position possible. All because he couldn't control his arrogance. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. For years, he had used his wealth to belittle others, to make himself feel bigger by making others feel small. But Mia Thompson had done something no one else had ever dared to do. She had stood up to him. And now, the consequences were crashing down on him. Meanwhile, Mia went about her life like nothing had happened. She didn't need revenge. She had already won. But a few days later, an unexpected email popped up in her inbox from David Langford. Subject, apology. Mia raised an eyebrow. David Langford? Apologizing? She opened the message. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I was wrong. I let my arrogance blind me, and I treated you in a way no one deserves to be treated. It's not an excuse, but maybe, for the first time, I understand what it's like to be put in a place where you feel powerless. You didn't have to do anything special. You just had to remind me that respect isn't something you buy. It's something you earn. I've spent my whole life believing that wealth makes a person important. But in that moment, standing in that restaurant, being laughed at by people I thought were beneath me, I finally understood. I'm not important. I'm just another man. And you, Mia Thompson, are far stronger than I will ever be. I hope you continue to prove men like me wrong. David. Mia read the email twice. Then she smiled, because she knew David Langford hadn't just lost a business deal that night. He had lost something even bigger, his illusion of superiority. And that was a lesson he would never forget. Weeks passed. Golden Ivy went back to business as usual. But something had shifted. Mia's co-workers treated her differently, not with fear, but with respect. Even the manager, who had once sided with power over principles, now saw things differently. Customers greeted her by name. Some even whispered, "You're the one who put Langford in his place, right?" She didn't brag about it. She didn't need to, because the real victory wasn't about embarrassing him. It was about proving that kindness, strength, and self-respect always win in the end. David Langford had spent his life believing that money made him untouchable. But Mia had proven something much bigger. The real power isn't in wealth. It's in knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take that away. So, the next time someone looks down on you, underestimates you, or tries to make you feel small, remember Mia Thompson. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply proving them wrong. And just like that, David Langford learned a lesson he would never forget. He had walked into that restaurant believing he was the most important person in the room, that his money, his name, and his reputation made him untouchable. But Mia Thompson changed everything. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek revenge. She simply held her ground. And in doing so, she showed everyone, including David, that real power isn't in how much money you have, but in how you treat people. David left that night with his pride shattered. His business took a hit. His connections weakened. But more than that, he was forced to see himself for who he really was. And Mia, she walked away with her dignity intact. Because the greatest victories in life aren't always loud. Sometimes they're just knowing that no one can break you. Now, here's the real question. What would you have done if you were in Mia's place? Would you have clapped back even harder? Stayed silent? Or handled it just like Mia did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories that prove that karma is always watching. See you in the next one.